Hey everyone, today we're here back at John's garage with our cars and we'll be discussing handling.
Yeah, and just generally how to set up your 86 for whatever you want to do with it, street, drift, grip. And we wanted to do that today because we have a friend in town who is an expert on the 86. A lot of you guys probably shop with his company. Grant from Battle Garage.
Hey, what's up, guys? So yeah, today we want to talk about anything that has to do with the handling and how the car drives. So we'll be talking about control arms, wheels and tires, braking, steering, things like that. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be exciting. We're gonna figure out the way to get the best out of your 86. So, Hosen, let's get your car up on the lift and we'll start talking.
Let's start with wheels and tires. So what I'm running on my car in the fronts are 15x8s and they're zero offset. For tires, I'm running an Advan Yokohama 8008 Neova. And I actually came from a 195/50 tire, and they used to be Yokohama S drives. And when I took that to the autocross, I found that it liked to understeer a lot. So on initial turn-in, it was very understeery, but very neutral. So when I upgraded to these tires, I felt like all my front end grip came back. I rarely get understeer. It's more oversteery now. I use it for drifting in the front, and yeah, it's a very solid setup that I use for the street and for the track.
My front wheel setup is a Workmeister. It's a 15x9 -15 with a 205 50/15 tire. I originally had Derezas on the front. They were more of a street tire. They weren't in the 200 treadwear class. I found that driving on flat tracks, the response was pretty good. Happy balance between over and understeer. No complaints about that. But as soon as I took it to a track with elevation changes and a slightly rougher surface, I had lost almost all my front end grip. So I upgraded to a Federal RSRR, and the grip is pretty insane. Tire size remained the same. And I found coming downhill, like when it's off camber, I used to wash out. Now I have all the grip I could ask for. I can get on the throttle and I'm not worried about losing or skidding anything on the front end. So I'm very happy with upgrading the tire to an R compound, the 200 treadwear, you could call it. And it works really well with a light car.
Yeah, so for us, we chose the 200 treadwear kind of tire because we were looking for a street tire that can perform really well on the track. But there are lots of questions that we still ask about, like, is this the best that we can get, or what other compromises can we make?
A lot of people told me to balance the front and rear tires in terms of the grip level. People like you kind of want to run tire pressures that are around the same ballpark, where I used to run close to 20 psi with the street tires on and nearly 45-50 psi in the rear, which was a little unbalanced. So getting a grippier tire on the front meant I could run slightly higher pressures and get a little bit closer to get the car feeling pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think both your guys' setups make sense for how you're using the car, right? So you're using the car as a dual-purpose, street/track, sometimes drift, right? And then Nick, you're usually going to the drift events, right? Mm-hmm. So you're really focusing on getting that front end grip so you don't wash out. By the way, how much camber are you guys running?
So I'm running 3.5 in the fronts for mine.
I was running 4.8 negative in the front.
Okay. And is there a reason why you chose those values for yourselves?
So I played around with my camber adjustment until I felt like I got the right amount of feel versus right amount of like comfort at low speed turning, because with more camber, it's really heavy to turn in parking lots. So I found that 3.5 was like a good balance for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mine was strictly aesthetics, and to make it fit. I usually had pretty wide wheels up front with spacers, and just to get that drift aesthetic. And if I had to fight myself through turns, so be it.
And what I like is both of them found these settings based on what's best for their uses, right? There's no best camber setting for any type of usage, right? So if someone is strictly driving on the street and they're covering a lot of miles and maybe they're actually driving to work with the car, you may not want to run so much camber because you'll wear out the inside of the tire very quickly, right? And for Nick, he needs to have clearance when he's drifting. So although that may not be the best for grip, for him it's best for his usages. Depending on how you're going to use the car, we have some ideas on what kind of camber you can be shooting for, and this is based on our experience, so take it with a grain of salt. But we think that if you're driving through the mountains and driving to work, you probably don't you want to preserve your tires, but you want to be able to have some grip when you are driving it hard. So we typically recommend about 2.5 to 3 degrees for camber for a daily driver or weekend warrior. If it's strictly a track car and you're running a higher spring rate, like an 8K set up on the front, or maybe 9K, and you have an actual R-Comp tire like an NT01, we would recommend 4 to 4.5 degrees for that setup. So there's a lot of debate. Should I get 14s or 15s with the Corollas? You see it all the time on the forums, right? And they do have some pros and cons. A lot of it's aesthetic, and if that's what's important to you, that's great. Pick whatever looks best to you. If we're talking about performance, we've seen that these cars can be faster with a little bit on the larger size of the wheel. So what I mean by that is, if you're running a 15-inch wheel and tire package on a car, you can typically get more grip out of the car, especially in forward and rear bite. And the reason for that is the rolling diameter of the tire is larger, so that it basically means that the tire contact patch is wider because the wheel is larger. So there's more of that surface area on there. This is also part of the reason you'll see larger wheels being used on like DTM cars and things of that nature. I think the guys that really pushed this the most were Taka and John Rusikoff in Formula D. They were trying to compete with all those Mustangs with crazy amounts of power and grip and all these much more modern suspension systems. And they found themselves having to go to 16-inch and then 17-inch wheel and tire packages to be able to keep up, with those modern cars. In fact, Taco is telling us that the 17-inch tires made so much grip that he would break gearboxes, whereas before he didn't with the smaller tires, just from that change alone. So if you're going to the track, you really can't go wrong with the 14 or 15-inch, wheel and tire package. The 14-inch tires can be a little bit cheaper if that's something that's important to you. But really, it's your choice. Whatever's good for you. All right, so we're going to talk about brakes now. The parts that we want to cover are what kind of brake fluid to use, drilled versus slotted rotors, when you should use a big brake kit or not, how brake bias affects the braking, as well as what kind of pads are good for your application. So if it's your first time going to the track, the most important thing is to focus on safety. Realistically, you're probably not going to be going that fast your first time, so we just need to make sure that your brakes are safe and you're able to stop yourself in the event that you need to stop suddenly. So the first thing that we recommend people to focus on is to make sure they have clean and high quality brake fluid in their system. The reason why you want to make sure that it's new fluid is because brake fluid is hydroscopic, which means that it's collecting water from the atmosphere, and you're getting water into the lines essentially. So when the caliper is heating up, when you're braking, if you have water in the lines, it'll vaporize and cause air pockets to be in your brake lines. It basically means that when you push the brake pedal, you're not going to have a firm brake pedal, and you're not going to be able to stop the car correctly. So another common question is what level of fluid do I need? Do I need to have the hyper expensive .4 JDM fluids, or what do I need, right? I think if you're cruising around the street, .3 is actually okay as long as it's fresh. If you are going to the track, it's better to use a high quality .4 fluid. Most people will probably be okay with something like an Ate Super Blue. It has a moderately high dry and wet boiling point. If you are still on the stock brake system, but maybe you have more power, or you're driving really hard, or your track has really long straightaways, you might need something a little bit higher end, like a Motul RBF 600 with a 600 Fahrenheit boiling point. And what that lets you do is it basically lets you get more heat into the system without the fluid failing. One thing that people don't realize though is the higher temperature fluids, they actually collect water faster. So that means they need to be changed, the fluid needs to be changed out more often. So you kind of have to balance that, like how often am I going to the track versus how much time do I have to be doing these kinds of brake fluid flushes. The next thing that's probably good to take a look at is what pads are you going to be using. Brake pads can be really confusing because there's all kinds of different brands that are promising different things. But I think the most important thing to recognize is how aggressive a pad that you are, what you actually need for your application. The reason this is important is if you're driving on the street a lot, you're going to want a pad that has long life and also gets up to temp and will brake the car quickly. maybe some of you guys have experienced, like if you have like a race pad and you're going down a hill and it's like a cold, winter morning and it just doesn't stop. It's because the pad hasn't got to temp and it's not in its operating range for optimal amount of grip. So another reason not to use a race pad on the street is not only will it not get up to temp quickly, but the pad actually is designed to operate at very high temperature to lubricate the rotor. I found out by accident one time when I was a kid a long time ago. I accidentally got some race pads and I put them on the back of my car. And I remember I was drifting at an event at night, and my friends were saying that my rotors were sparking. I was like, "What do you mean they're sparking?" Maybe 5,000 miles later, I was taking the wheel off, and my rotor was almost completely gone. And that's because I was driving on the street and the pad wasn't in its operating temperature. So essentially the rotor was not being lubricated by the pad as it was designed to be. So it's best to really have a race pad for track day, or and then switch it to a street pad like when you're driving on the street. If you can't do that, there's some good like middle ground pads like the Porterfield R4S. It kind of does both things like pretty well. And WinMax also has a whole range of pad levels that can be used for the right application. But it is confusing. There's a lot of companies out there that make brake pads. If you guys have any questions, you can always reach out to us at Battle Garage and we can help you find the right pad for your application. So you can see Hosen here doesn't have a stock curl set up. He's actually using the Battle Garage big brake kit. And a lot of times people ask like, do I need big brakes? Like when do I need big brakes, right? I'd say that if you have already gone to a higher temp fluid and using the right pad at the track, if you're still having braking issues, that'd be a good time to look at a big brake kit. But the other thing to keep in mind is, if you have a big brake kit on the front, you're gonna have a lot of braking power at the front axle, and if you haven't done anything with the rear, you're gonna be over braked on the front. So we recommend that whoever's installing a big brake kit, whether it's from us or any other of the good companies out there, it's important to install a brake bias valve, and that'll let you fine tune exactly how much brake pressure that you're sending to the rear. On my own track car, I'm running the same kit, and I have a completely stock rear brake setup with a Wilwood bias valve. And I found through testing that after installing it, I was sending most of the brake pressure to the rear, and so the front was actually the front was actually so powerful that it was able to work with that balance. But when I got that bias correct, the braking power was phenomenal. Like the car just stopped so fast, and that's because we've really optimized how much brake pressure is being balanced between the front and rear for the given spring rate, the given tire, and everything else on the car. And then final note about brake biases, the cool thing about having an adjustable valve is if you change tire compounds, you will need to change the brake bias to suit that tire. And it was really fun for me to be able to change the tire compounds and then make adjustments to the track after a couple laps and just dial in for whatever the setup is, and the results were great. And the final thing I want to talk about is there's a lot of questions about should I be using drilled rotors or slotted rotors or both, kind of like you can see here. Our answer to that is as long as you're using a quality brake rotor from a reputable manufacturer, you'll probably be okay. There are some myths about drilled rotors like causing cracking. And I think that really comes down to like how good of the quality is of the metals being used in the rotor. One other thing I want to add is, what do the slots do for your braking system? Slots are useful because as you are braking, you're building up pad material that's being rubbed off, and the slots have a couple purposes. They help to get rid of the gases that are building up in the pad when you're braking really hard. And they also help to clear out that brake junk out of the braking system to make sure your pads are able to apply force quickly and properly.